Welcome to True Spies, the podcast that takes you deep inside the greatest secret missions of all time.
Suddenly, out of the darkness appeared Bin Laden.
You'll meet the people who live life undercover. What do they know? What are their skills? And what would you do in their position?
Vengeance felt good. Seeing these people pay for what they'd done felt righteous.
True Spies from Spyscape Studios, wherever you get your podcasts.
In January of 1915, Ernest Shackleton's ship, Endurance, became encased in the ice in the Weddell Sea. Through determination, grit, and savvy, Shackleton would lead his men through a brutal winter, then over hundreds of miles of Antarctic ice, followed by 800 miles across some of the roughest waters in the world. It is one of the most extraordinary and inspirational journeys in the history of exploration. Find this story and many others at the Explorers Podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts or at explorerspodcast.com.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 577, Operation Flax and the Palm Sunday Massacre. Last time, the Allied attack on the Wadi Akarit line was successful, thanks to the men of the 4th Indian Division. And guessing how that battle was going to turn out, General von Arnim had already pulled back the panzers at El Guitar, which had been holding back Patton's 2nd Corps. Now freed, Patton bellowed at Colonel Benson to dash for the coast, and things started out well enough. That is, until the 1st British Army to the north of Patton also moved out. The way it turned out, with the 8th British Army pushing up from the south, and the 1st British Army pushing east, and the Axis forces retreating to the northeastern corner of Tunisia, soon Patton found himself pushed out of the line. So yes, it was another Allied victory, but this squeezing out, unintentional as it was, would not help Anglo-American relations. But such is the need for speed during war. So it may come as a surprise that Eisenhower wrote of this moment, "Within the African theater, one of the greatest products of the victory was the progress achieved in the welding of Allied unity and the establishment of a command team that was already showing the effects of a growing confidence and trust among all its members." Which was true to a point. His team and his troops had learned much about modern warfare. But with this statement, Ike, and he cannot be blamed for this, was saying, "Though I may currently be the commanding general, European Theater of Operations, and the Supreme Commander, Allied Expeditionary Force of North Africa Theater of Operations, I would really like to be the Supreme Allied Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces. In other words, top dog." Cynical? Perhaps, but it's also true. It's human nature. Also guilty of being all too human was CNC Alexander, as his plans had been to get 8th Army past the Gabes Gap and to not cut off General Mess's army, though again that had been tried near the end. No, von Arnim now had all of his forces together so they could rally on together to keep resisting, provided their supplies kept coming in, which they were not in the numbers that they had been. While the opposing land armies went at each other, the Allied air forces and navies focused on cutting the sea and air routes used from Sicily to Tunisia that were keeping von Arnim, literally, in the war. Another part of the Allied navies and air forces was protecting their own supply vessels. Thus, the holidays and the New Year, which had just passed, had been busy. But the gifts of all that hard work then were to start showing up now. As miserable and limiting as the rainy season had been at the end of 1942 and early 1943 in the region, the overall downtime of the Allied forces allowed their logistics personnel to play a bit of catch-up. They had further developed the captured ports to handle more. They had improved the rail lines, they had improved the roads, and they were able to bring in more ships. So soon, a reserve of supplies was growing for whenever these damned rains stopped. For the Axis, it was literally the opposite. Along with the Allied supply lines improving, so had their air arm in bombing Axis shipments in the Mediterranean. As more Allied airfields were brought online by January of 1943, fewer Axis ships successfully made the trip to Tunisia. In January of 1943, von Arnim had received 70,000 tons, which was down from late 1942. In April of 1943, that 70,000 tons fell to 29,000 tons in May. And after the Battle of the Wadi Akarit, that amount was soon down to 3,000 tons. Von Arnim told Berlin he needed 65,000 tons a month to stay in the fight, but doing him one better, Hitler promised to double it, so they could take the fight all the way back to Casablanca. Clearly, by this point, the German leader was losing touch with reality. To their credit, the Axis forces did not stop trying. If they could not ship in what they needed, they would fly it in, which is when the large Me-323 transport planes started coming in, capable of carrying 10 tons each time. These planes, the largest land-based transports in the war, brought in reinforcements, ammunition, and petrol. That was the good news. The bad news was that, as these flights were so on schedule, the Allies made notes, and then made a plan. By the end of February, the Allies were making notes of the number and times of these German giants coming in. With this information acquired, also gleaned from Ultra, now it was time to act, from whence Operation Flax came into being. This organized response was to have started the last week of March, but foul weather pushed that back to April 5th. Hey everyone, Ray here. Do you honestly think that you are the only one struggling with ED? Please, you're not. In fact, 40% of men experience ED by the age of 40. But now there's an easier way to fix it, all from your home. No awkward conversations, no doctor's office. Let RexMD, an online telehealth service that helps men get real FDA-approved ED medications, help you regain your confidence. Here's how it works. First, ED meds are not one size fits all, but RexMD has you covered with options. You'll tell them what's going on, your health history, and what you're looking for through a short quiz. Then a U.S. licensed provider will review your information and prescribe a medication, if appropriate. Your treatment will be sent to you with free 2-day delivery. That's it. It's that easy. And the RexMD team is there for any questions you have. And again, just know you're not alone in this, but some men are taking the bull by the horns. What are you waiting for? These are the good years. Now, make them better. And you can get up to 95% off ED treatment with RexMD. Visit rexmd.com/WW2. This is going to change everything. See full details and usage at rexmd.com. Prescription required. Results may vary. Not that the Allies were the only one to think of air power as a solution. As April opened up, the Luftwaffe created the Flying Corps Tunisia with 3 commands of about 300 fighters in the area. Further, these 12 German groups would have a rudimentary radar network. At the time of Operation Flax got underway, the German transport leader, number 2 of the Mediterranean Sea, had about 80 to 120 aircraft at any one time flying in supplies. They would fly in at an altitude of 150 feet, or 46 meters, around noon each day, when the Allies were thought to be understaffed because they were having lunch. The Ju-52s, a medium bomber/transport plane, which were mostly used for this, brought in about 90 tons. The Me-323 Giants brought in 30 tons, again being heavily outnumbered by the Ju-52s. As for the transport aircraft themselves, that number went up after the defeat at Stalingrad. Those planes there had been trying to supply General Paulus's Sixth Army. Now, they were flying over the Mediterranean. By April, there would be 426 transport planes in all. It was the job of the commander of the Northwestern African Strategic Air Force, one James Doolittle of the Doolittle Raid, to create the attack plan. As the goal was to stop the enemy from receiving as much supplies as possible, the attacks would have to occur when the planes were in between Sicily and Tunisia, but also against the access-controlled airfields in Tunisia and the staging areas in Sicily, now piled high with supplies. That the work there was being done by Indian soldiers, now POWs, that could not be helped. Those supplies could not be allowed to get through. The main question for Doolittle was when to start the attacks, as it would not take long for the Germans to figure out that something coordinated was amiss, and thus they would switch to nighttime flights. And as the distance was so short, an Allied plane would practically have to be in position to attack. Thus, Supreme Commander of all Allied air forces in the Mediterranean, Air Marshal Arthur Tedder, and Commander of Allied air forces in northwestern Africa, General Karl Spaatz, would decide when to give Doolittle the green light. And they had to get this right, for as much air and naval power as the Allies were putting into Operation Flax, the enemy was still quite capable, with their 300 fighters and various naval vessels, mostly U-boats, of causing serious damage. On a side note, British Admiral Andrew Cunningham, the Allied naval commander, had his own coordinated plan in place, named Operation Retribution. It complemented Flax, as its goal was to stop any enemy forces in Tunisia from escaping to Sicily. And Cunningham, being Cunningham, named the operation Retribution, to pay back the enemy for his losses of destroyers during the Greek campaign and when Crete had been captured. His order to his ships was basically sink, burn, and destroy. Let nothing pass. The air arm was to starve the enemy, the naval arm to entrap them. It was time. Tedder and Spaatz gave the green light. At 6:30 a.m., April 5th, 26 P-38s, a twin-engine multi-purpose fighter with the distinctive twin boom design, flew over the Sicilian Strait, hoping for the first catch of the day. Also, 18 B-25 medium bombers, escorted by 32 P-38s, set up an interdiction line. As nothing ever works according to plan in war, 6 of the P-38s had to return home for various mechanical issues. The B-25's escort was now that much weaker. Still, coming upon an Axis convoy, the attackers went in. When it was over, the B-25s claimed 2 enemy ferries damaged and a destroyer was sunk. Only 1 B-25 was lost. Tragic, but an acceptable trade-off for the Allies. An hour and a half later, at 8 a.m., those 26 P-38s that flew over the Sicilian Strait alone got company. Coming at them, though the nervous American pilots overestimated the numbers, were 31 Ju-52 medium bombers/transports, 10 Bf-109s, 7 Bf-110s, and 4 Ju-87 Stukas, and 1 FW-190 fighter. The Americans turned to engage and were soon joined by the 82nd Fighter Group, as this was not supposed to be a fair fight. That's for Hollywood. So, with so many planes in proximity, this battle took a while. But when the two sides parted, and the numbers were never fully accurate, the Germans lost at least 13 Ju-52s and 2 Bf-109s. The Americans, at least 4 P-38s. Again, a numerical victory for the Allies, but it showed that the enemy was still a threat. Later that day, again, the idea was to cause as much damage as possible in the shortest amount of time possible. 18 B-17 heavy bombers flew over Tunis and bombed the airfield there. 2 Me-323 Giants, 2 Ju-52s, and 5 Italian transports were wrecked. A second bombing mission hit the airfield at Bizerta, destroying 1 German fighter. By now, the Germans had fighters over all of these areas, focused and ready for the next attack, which is exactly what the Allies wanted. A little later, 35 B-25s and 18 P-38s hit the airfield in western Sicily. At least 80 Axis aircraft, all kinds, were below and barely camouflaged. Though the number is uncertain, the fragmentation bombs used by the Americans achieved solid results. As the Allied planes departed the area, they were set upon by 15 Bf-109s. 2 of the B-25s were lost. 2 more Allied air raids were conducted on that April 5th, and in the end, the Allies' claim for Axis planes lost was greatly exaggerated. But it's safe to say that at least 25 Ju-52s were lost, along with a few Bf-109s and at least 2 Italian transports. The numbers, of course, could have been better, which is always the case, but the point is, the Ju-52s were doing most of the ferrying, so von Arnim would now receive even less than before. Not that Operation Flax was over. It was pared down, but it still continued, while the emphasis was now shifted to Sicily. As the Axis air defenses of Sicily was the next target, the number of Allied planes involved increased appropriately. On April 10th, some 75 P-38s engaged 26 Italian aircraft. The Italians lost 2 fighters and 10 transports in this engagement. Death by 1,000 cuts it may be, but it's still death. Still, in the morning of April 10th, over Cape Bon in North Eastern Tunisia, 27 P-38s and 18 B-25s attacked 30 Ju-52s, which only had 2 Bf-110s for escort. 15 Bf-109s were scrambled to assist, but before they got there, the B-25s were able to fly close enough to the Ju-52s to use their own guns on the enemy. When the Bf-109 showed up, they managed to shoot down 1 P-38. But again, this was a limited but lopsided Allied victory. That day, at least 10 Ju-52s, 1 Ju-88, and 1 Bf-109 were lost. Over the next few days, the number of Allied planes increased, as did their patrols, while the Axis formations were reduced in quality and quantity. The next day, April 11th, the Americans had another solid day, shooting down at least 17 Ju-52s, but it was an RAF squadron that ran into a lightly escorted enemy formation. However, luck was with the Germans that day, as most of those aircraft survived. But that night, maybe to make up for it, Wellington bombers hit an enemy airfield on Sicily, and they only lost 2 of their own.
Doug. Here we have the Limu Emu in its natural habitat, helping people customize their car insurance and save hundreds with Liberty Mutual. Fascinating. It's accompanied by his natural ally, Doug.
Limu? Is that guy with the binoculars watching us?
Cut the camera. They see us.
Only pay for what you need at libertymutual.com.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
Savings vary. Underwritten by Liberty Mutual Insurance Company and affiliates. Excludes Massachusetts.
The Desert Air campaign was just as successful. On April 12th, the RAF Desert Air Force took over most of the Flax operations, meaning that they were spread thin. Then again, hopefully the enemy Air Force would not be able to take advantage of this. On April 16th, 13 Spitfires engaged a large Axis formation. 7 Italian SM-82 bombers were splashed, along with 1 Bf-109. The British here lost 2 of their own for the cause. Yet on this same day, the Germans decided to take the fight to the enemy. 8 Focke-Wulf 190 fighters with 16 Bf-109s attacked the Allied airfield in Morocco. It was hoped that the distance from Tunisia would mean that the enemy there was relaxed, and this worked. 6 Douglas A-20 Havoc light bombers were destroyed on the ground. Up to this point, since the first day of April 5th, the exchange of aircraft lost by both sides had been coming down. That was about to change. On April 18th, the 9th Air Force's 57th Fighter Group had gone up, but found nothing. Going up again later that day, this time a group of 47 Curtiss P-40 Warhawks was cruising at 4,000 feet, and they were hunting. Overhead, there were 12 Spitfires looking out for them, cruising at 15,000 feet. It's a good thing that the Americans were so low, as a formation of 30 Ju-52s were spotted, flying north at 1,000 feet. The Spitfires and the P-40s started their attack runs. But what they found when they got closer were 65 Ju-52s, 16 Italian fighters, and 5 Bf-109s. Panicked, the passengers in the Ju-52s started firing their handheld machine guns at the coming Allied fighters out of the plane's windows. In all, the Allies lost 6 fighters, American and British, but the Axis lost at least 58 Ju-52s, 15 Italian aircraft, and at least 3 German fighters. Some of these were shot down over the water. The rest crash-landed on Sicilian soil. But even if the pilot or crew survived, and few did, the machine was considered a total loss. This day would be remembered as the Palm Sunday Massacre. The next few days continued the pattern. The Allies lost planes and pilots, but the Axis lost more, which they could not afford. But the bottom line was, vastly inadequate supplies were getting through to von Arnim. April 22nd would see South African and Polish pilots contributing as well as fighters from Malta. The little island that could, which had seen Rommel strangled of supplies, was now contributing the same to General von Arnim. Air Marshal Göring canceled all the flights after the Palm Sunday Massacre, but Kesselring reminded him of the need of his men in Tunisia. So Göring allowed more flights, but only at night, and those were to be limited. But on this day, when this Allied international mix of pilots came into contact with 21 of the large Me-323 Giants, 16 of them were shot down, and less than 200 had been built in total. A bookend of sorts for the air war over Tunisia. Unsurprisingly, the Axis forces in Tunisia did not have enough of anything. As April ended, the Luftwaffe evacuated most of their personnel. Von Arnim might have wanted to convert them to infantry, but he did not have the arms nor the ammunition to give to them, so let them go. Not that even evacuation at this point was safe. By now, most Luftwaffe personnel refused to get aboard a transport. That was death. So they would beg a Bf-109 pilot to let them squeeze in to the cockpit on the return flight home. And this happened more than a few times. Air Marshal Arthur Tedder could now report to Eisenhower, as his air deputy, that the skies over Tunisia belonged to the Allies. Now it was time to finish off the Axis ground forces, with little to no supplies coming in. Only one question remained. How much fight did they still have in them?